I have a confession to make. I'm a coffee addict. I just absolutely love coffee. I could drink coffee every minute of every day for the rest of my life. I drink a shockingly high amount of coffee that often confuses and worries people. I've been known to get into work after having an espresso or two, to making a pot of filter coffee, to then having a couple V60s in the afternoon. I just consume an extreme amount of coffee. I've been known on days to not have a drop of any other liquid but coffee. I just absolutely love coffee. But what's quite an important caveat is I've never felt the effect of caffeine. I've always thought people were lying or joking or, using a metaphor whenever they said they got buzzed off of caffeine. I was always so confused. I have never felt the effect at all. From my understanding, there are two genetic markers that regulate how caffeine is affected by your body. The first is the CYP1A2 gene, which regulates if you're a fast or slow metabolizer of caffeine. So you can do these tests online relatively cheaply. And I did one, and it turns out I'm a fast metabolizer, which I knew was the case. There's also the ADORA2A gene test, which is actually a lot harder to find online, sadly. But it essentially regulates how much caffeine affects your body, so you can be in a hyper or hypo sensitivity. My understanding is I'm highly likely to be a hypo sensitivity, which means any caffeine that sits in my system for a long time has no effect, essentially. That gives me the golden combination of a fast clearance of caffeine and a low sensitivity to any caffeine that sits in my system, which is good, obviously, if you want to drink coffee, but bad if you want to use coffee as sort of a way to wake up or do a test or do an assignment. So I've never had that influence, right? And the result is that I could have a shot of espresso at 11 o'clock at night or a cup of coffee at 2 a.m. and have no effect. Coffee is much like wine in that there's quite a few levels to its consumption. So first of all, coffee is actually a bit of a misnomer. So what coffee is it's the seed of a fruit from the coffee plant, right? And there's two different coffee plants. There's the Arabica gene and the Robusta gene. So you've probably only had the Arabica gene. The Arabica is the more gourmet version, basically. It makes up about 60% of the world's production in coffee plant and is the much more temperamental variant of coffee. So it can only be grown at certain altitudes. It requires a very specific temperature range. It's quite susceptible to pests and disease. Your plant takes about 5 years to mature, but only produces about a pound of coffee a year, which is 500 grams. If you keep in mind that an average shot of a double shot of espresso is 18 grams of coffee, you see it's not actually a lot of coffee per plant. You need quite a lot to get what you want. Robusta accounts for about 40% of the world's production, so the remaining percentage. And that is produced by countries like Vietnam or Brazil. And so Vietnam is the major production place. It's also the major consumption of Robusta. Robusta is considered technically lower quality because it has a harsher flavour than Arabica, but you can still get a great cup of coffee from either. Robusta, interestingly, actually has a higher caffeine content. And so there's a push by a lot of companies for more people to consume Robusta. So for example, if you take Black Sheep coffee in the UK, you can get Robusta and Arabica from there. But as I said, the major consumption of Robusta is in Vietnam. And this is because in Vietnam, they have a culture of using sweetened condensed milk in their coffee. So the sweetened condensed milk balances out the harsher flavours that are in the Robusta bean. Robusta has a bit of bad press because it's considered to be harsher than Arabica. But as I said, you can get a great cup of coffee from either. And Robusta is making waves in its cultivation. Arabica was earlier on and therefore has much further lead time. So Arabica is produced around the world right now in Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Rwanda, Tanzania. But Robusta is making headway because Robusta can be grown at different altitudes. So Robusta can be grown at higher temperatures, higher humidities, different altitudes. So a lot of sub-Saharan Africa and West Africa is currently growing Robusta, and it's cheaper for them to grow. And that cultivation of Arabica is split into 3 waves of coffee. So your first wave of coffee is the coffee you'd buy at a supermarket. It's typically low quality, no emphasis on the ingredients or the growing process or the washing or processing of the coffee bean. Your flavors are coffee, essentially, very muddy, very sort of harsh. Your second wave is your Starbucks of the world, right? So where The beans are dark roasted, they're very harsh, deep flavors, but you would balance that with sugar and syrups and milks, so you don't actually really taste the coffee. And then the final wave is third wave, which is specialty coffee, which is a focus on single origin, traceable, fresh coffee beans that you roast for specific flavors. So there's an emphasis on lighter roasts for citrus or floral or fruity notes that you don't see in the other two waves. The first recognizable bean of third wave coffee is Jamaican Blue Mountain. So Jamaican Blue Mountain is a specific type of coffee that's grown in the Blue Mountain region of Jamaica at a specific altitude. It's actually quite a lovely coffee. It's got a sort of smooth, drinkable profile, not a lot of acidity, just a nice coffee flavour. It's not particularly special nowadays relative to specialty coffee, but keep in mind when it first came up, we're talking the 1980s, right? So relative to second or first wave coffee, it's actually quite a unique thing. But as I said, third wave coffee is expanded all across the world. There's a whole bunch of different varieties I could mention. My favourite would be Rwandan. It's a particularly citrusy, fruity note that I quite like. Costa Rican is also up there. That's quite a nice, fresh cup of coffee, not a huge amount of acidity, quite a nice light roast. But that's the real value of third wave coffee, is that you can get essentially anything that you possibly could want in your coffee. You could get a nice dark Indonesian, or you could get a El Salvadorian, which would be nice and harsh and deep roasted notes. You could get a low acidity Costa Rican, as mentioned, or you could get a nice Indian coffee. The world really is your oyster with coffee nowadays, and that's the real value that the Americans and the Canadians have caught on to, but the Brits haven't. And I think that's something that needs to make waves in the UK, is specifically roasting your coffee for what you want. And then, of course, the other thing that hasn't made huge waves in the UK is brewing methods. So traditionally, you have two types of brewing methods. You have espresso and you have filter. So espresso, as the name is mentioned, obviously includes espresso, but it does include other methods like AeroPress or mocha. The idea is that you are brewing coffee under pressure, right? You have a bed of coffee that is ground at a certain fineness. You force water through the bed at pressure and extract the notes from the coffee. So think of 9 bars of pressure through a bed of coffee in an espresso machine to produce your small shot. Same with a mocha pot. So a mocha pot works via the action of a chamber of water being under a heater, or a flame in this case, forcing the water through the bed into your coffee chamber. Same with an AeroPress. An AeroPress, you place the bed of the coffee in the filter. You yourself act as the pressure, pressing the coffee down through the bed into your mug of choice. Filter is a bit wider of a category. It includes things like Chemex or pour over or V60, whatever you want to call it, essentially, where the idea is that, much like a percolator or a drip coffee machine, you're pouring water through a bed of coffee that goes through a filter into your cup. You get quite a clean cup of coffee, low acidity, nice flavors, but it doesn't have the same sort of richness of an espresso shot, and that's kind of something that left to be desired. Obviously, there's an advantage and disadvantage to both espresso and filter, in that espresso requires you to have an espresso machine, so it's something that typically has quite a high cost. Your grinder has to be better because you need to grind finer because of the pressure required. If your coffee is not fine enough, what you'll find is you'll have channeling, because the water will just bypass your bed of coffee. I think what's quite significant that a lot of people miss is that neither is superior over the other. I quite like both. I like having a nice filter coffee in the morning, but an espresso coffee in the afternoon works for me. Italians the other way around. They prefer a mocha right in the morning as they get up. I find it's a bit too heavy for me. But it really is your choice, and that's the beauty of it all, is that when you can experiment with the coffee bean and the filter method, and whether you do espresso or drip or, all these choices, it really is your oyster that a lot of people miss when they talk about coffee. And of course, coffee has so much depth that I'm missing in this short video, but it really is a world for you to explore. I mean, I've personally spent a lot of time thinking about espresso, and I'm slowly moving on to roasting my own coffee with a popcorn machine. But I think in the new year, I'd love to get into roasting my own coffee in a proper Be More roaster. And that's the sort of depth you can really get with coffee that you can't get with other things. There's a lot of value, I think, in that.